Well, hey, hi. Long time no see. Well, I don't know. I don't know that anyone's ever seen me. I don't know. Is that how? There we go. Couple orders of business. First one, let's take my Zhongyao. It's traditional Chinese medicine. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it's usually in a packet, some kind of powder. It's not like a pill form. What's in here? I don't know, a bunch of herbs and things. And then I'm going to do something really weird. Hold on a second. Wait. I have water. Mmm. Delicious. It's bitter. And, oh, hello. It's bitter and it is actually not as bad as as you imagine. I hurt my knee. This is supposed to heal my knee. All right. Now that that's out of the way, join me on the sofa. I'm just gonna yap. I have no real agenda here, other than I haven't been on YouTube in a while, so I was thinking about things to do unrelated to the videos I've done before. Well, maybe not unrelated, but not exactly what I was doing before, which was like trying to teach English through through some comprehensible input videos. I think now what I want to do is maybe just talk about my own like language learning journey. Here's the deal. I am currently in Taiwan, so I'm not, although I'm from the US, I don't live there. I've been working here for 6 years, and previous to here, I was in Vietnam for like 2 years. So 8 years-ish over here in Asia, and dealing with a couple languages, certainly Vietnamese in Vietnam and Mandarin Chinese over here. So the journey of like learning or dealing with those languages, because they're so different than Spanish or French, Latin-based languages, could be helpful, I think, for some people who are attempting to learn tonal languages or Asian languages. I was thinking about doing videos related to my own sort of journey dealing with those languages. I am far from fluent in both of them, and I mean, here I can kind of get by in Mandarin. So I go to the store, I order my food, all the things you have to do. I can have little tiny chit chat, but I can do that same thing in Spanish, and I could probably fake that in German. My French is a little bit better. I can go a little bit deeper in French, but as far as like having a level of fluency in Chinese, it hasn't happened. So like just living here for 6 years is not what gets you fluent, just being around it. I hear Chinese everywhere I go every day, but if it's not connected to some indication of the meaning, then the word will not just go, wash right over you. I go to the cafe every day, and they would ask me if I wanted makabe, right? This is one of the first words I acquired in Chinese, because they would say that word makabe, and then they would, it's connected to a thing that I can see, and so that was easier to acquire. Shoji, for cell phone, like those were my kind of first words, because you can see the object. It's a super common word. It's connected to an everyday experience, and then so like you can get some words just from like being in the environment. You'll get certainly a limited vocabulary just from being around, but you don't get fluent just from being there. I learned that. I think most people think, if you just show up in the country, you'll get it. But I mean, but a couple things have to happen, right? You'd have to have a purpose for learning. You have to have like a reason. I think having a reason is pretty crucial. If you don't have the motivation to learn, you're never going to. I mean, I know people who've been here for 10 years, 15 years who don't really speak any Chinese at all. And they just hang out with, people that speak English or whatever their native language is. And you can build those bubbles, those little expat, whatever, bubbles or whatever. I choose really not to live in those. I have very few friends here from, in fact, I have no friends here from the US, not in this city. So, it's not something I'm really interested in, but all my friends here speak English. So even if they're not from the US, English is our primary speaking language. You almost never use Chinese together. So that's limited my exposure to the language, my interactions with my friends. And then with my work is in English. So it's like 100%, 99% in English. I'm teaching, so I'm using English to plan my lessons, and in the class I'm speaking English, and I'm reading in English and looking for materials in English, and everything is in English. And so, I'm spending 40 hours or whatever a week in my first language. And then I come home from work, and the last thing I really want to do is study, So if you're like most working people, you don't have a lot of time, even if you have the desire. I mean, so many people I know are like, oh, I really want to learn Spanish, I really want to learn Japanese. But it's like, if you're a busy person and you come home from work and you're exhausted, maybe the last thing you want to do is like study, right? You just want to kind of turn off your brain and talk to your friends. You're not going to be speaking Japanese to your friends or whatever language you're trying to learn. So yeah, it's motivation is critical. I mean, most people are motivated because, like, a lot of my students, for example, they're like, if I don't learn English, I can't work, I can't get a job, and if you can't get a job, you don't get money. That's a great motivation, right? So that love is a big motivation. Someone falls in love with somebody who's speaks a different language, and they want to communicate, or communicate with their family if they get deep into some relationship or something. That's a pretty good motivation. Could just be interest. I mean, a lot of people learn Japanese just because they don't mind spending 4 hours a day watching anime or whatever media is interesting to them. A lot of my students who learned English were just really into some online game, or they're really into some like TV series. One of my students, I asked him how he learned, and he said he really liked How I Met Your Mother. He just loved the characters, he loved the show, and he didn't mind watching it again and again. And that's a ton of input. That's like a ton of kind of everyday English connected to, real world, more or less real world situations and characters, that he likes to kind of spend time with. Another one, watch The Walking Dead, which, but if you like it, right? If you like the show, then you have no problem spending time in it. So you're getting all that language input just from doing something you like to do. Now, of course, if you put the subtitles, maybe you're focusing on the subtitle and not hearing the language, but it does help for sure. For sure. I've had a few students who really, Harry Potter was another one. Some of my students, they started with Harry Potter. The first book is written for lower levels, not the lowest level. I mean, the first Harry Potter book is still not A level, right? So she was pretty advanced to read that first one, but the books get more advanced. So as she developed in her skill, she was able to kind of advance with the series. I'm gonna get more comfortable. Yeah, I don't know. So where was I going with this? This is my yapping video. I'm just literally gonna yap. Um, I'm just talking about language, how people learn languages, and kind of what their experiences are. I do think there's a place for classroom learning, especially if you have a first language already. So automatically, you're going to be comparing in your brain. You're going to be translating. You're going to be going, okay, that's different than my L1, my first language. So you're going to be making those comparisons. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think this total immersion thing can be useful to a point. I took a class in Canada. I was learning French. It was 100% in French. I was in a classroom situation with teachers. You're teaching grammar, very kind of traditional method for the most part. I had one teacher who did not teach as in that kind of more traditional method. I got the most out of his class, but for the teachers who were teaching in that really traditional method, there were moments when I certainly wanted to ask a question in English and just get a simple answer in English, and I could move on, right? But I couldn't, because I was 100% immersion. So I don't think there's anything wrong with using your L2. I'm sorry, using your L1, your first language, to learn your L2, learning your second language. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I have this book. I've just been reading this one lately. It's Studying Vietnamese Through English. So it's using my first language to learn Vietnamese. Is it the best way to do it? I mean, if you're constantly going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, if you do that all the time, I don't know that that's necessarily, maybe it's slower. I don't know. I mean, I really don't know. For the longest time, I've been functioning on this sort of methodology, which is based on the Stephen Krashen comprehensible input thing. There are a ton of videos on YouTube about Stephen Krashen and comprehensible input. Just look it up. I'm not going to go into it here, but basically, it's that we learn our first language when someone speaks to us in a way that communicates meaning, and then you keep hearing those sounds connected to those meanings, and eventually you acquire the language, right, over time. So it's just that constant, someone's talking to you, someone's speaking to you at a kind of, at a lower level, I guess, let's put it that way, in a way that you can understand, and eventually the child develops more and more complex. Now that's different. I mean, once you've acquired your first language, like I said, you're going to probably be comparing it to your whatever second language you're picking up is going to now be sort of competing in your brain, maybe. And if you learn a third language or something, I heard recently that if you pick up a third language, it then competes with whatever second language you've acquired. So I don't know if that's true or not, but quite possibly, especially if they're close to each other. So I got pretty good with my French, from not great, but good enough. I could survive. Drop me into a French-speaking country, I'm okay. But when I was living in Vietnam, I went to go study Vietnamese. I do remember it activating the French part of my brain, it activating the L2. So even though I hadn't been using French for a long time, it was interesting that that kind of happened. When I was learning Vietnamese, now they're so different. I mean, there's a few words in Vietnamese that come from French, like some food words or technology words, but you don't necessarily know that immediately. It's not that obvious. Unlike the Chinese, like the Chinese words in Vietnamese, I think are a bit more obvious. Maybe the French words that are kind of found their way into Vietnamese language are less obvious, um, but I did find myself kind of it's sort of activating that L2 and comparing it to that. It's interesting. But I never got, so I'm still A level in Vietnamese. I'm still A level in Chinese, even though I've been here for 6 years, and it's mostly my own fault. But I mean, but also, you know, I'm working full time, and so I have that, like working adults who, you know, how much free time do you have to do things, to study things? You know, do you want to do that? You know, the motivation factor. Yeah. But I'm always thinking about, I want to improve them. I want to get to that B2, you know, the A levels, B levels, C levels, the European kind of language level. A is your beginner, B is your intermediate, C is your advanced, and then they subdivide them: A1, A2, B1, B2. At B2, you're pretty good. At B2, you're able to kind of have everyday conversations. You're able to kind of communicate at a deeper level. You can have those meaning of life conversations a bit more, right? And you can likely read just about everything, like a regular newspaper, or you know, or listen to the news or something. All those kind of common words. C level is going to be, you know, literature and all those. But getting to a B2 level is fantastic, because at that point you're on your own. You don't need necessarily a teacher at that point, even though I have students who still like to have a teacher even in their C levels. But I think it's mostly at that point, because you could just do it through reading, really just keep reading, you know, at higher levels. But I think at that point a lot of people like to have a teacher just because they're getting it's the kind of push, you know, to keep going. It's more creating the motivation, maybe. It'd be great to be at that B2 level for Chinese and Vietnamese. I like the idea of doing both, of learning both. Although that, you know, there's some overlap. Like I said, there's Vietnamese has I've read different things, but maybe let's say up to like 20 or 30% of Vietnamese language is going to be somehow connected to Chinese language. I've also heard Cantonese, you know, finds its way into Vietnamese. Very small amount of French finds its way into Vietnamese. But when you have when you have languages that are kind of close, I mix them up. You know, it's easier to mix them up. If you're learning Portuguese and Spanish, right, you're probably going to have a bit of a harder time than if you're learning Arabic and Portuguese or something that's quite different. Is it crazy to learn two languages at the same time? Maybe. Maybe. But it was, my experience coming here was like, so I was, for a while, I was kind of between Vietnam and Taiwan. I was kind of back and forth, and I wasn't really sure where I was going to stay. I ended up staying in Taiwan. I've been here the longest, but since I wasn't really sure, I was picking up or beginning to pick up both languages at the same time. I was in Vietnam, I come to Taiwan, I had learned a bit of Vietnamese, and I came over here, and I'm living in a Chinese-speaking world, and then picking up some words, and then going back to Vietnam, and you know, so I was kind of like, they were kind of happening at the same time, and really getting mixed in my brain. There's, I mean, a simple example is the number is like just counting. In Vietnamese, một hai ba, ba is 3, but ba in Chinese is 8. You know, so just that same sound, ba, is two really different numbers. So I still mix them up. So yeah, it's it's maybe a bit crazy to try to learn both at the same time. Is that what I'm going to do? Is that what my next video is going to be about? The journey of learning languages is a long one. I think you often see these guys on YouTube who are like, I learned Chinese in 1 year, or I learned blah 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 in 1 year. I guarantee those people, that's all they were really doing. So for a year, they probably weren't working full time. They weren't working a full time job and had a very active social life, and with people who didn't speak that language they're trying to learn. Um, they they were probably hyper focused on just that was their job, right? Just learning that language. I think in a year you could learn just about any language if you had the time, right? It's all about the time. If you have 8 hours a day, or 6 hours, or even 4 hours a day, it's quite a bit. If you had 4 hours a day to just focus on language, and you would be doing well. Do I know Hindi? I wish I knew Hindi. That would be so fun. Oh man, I wish I knew Hindi. Yeah, I'd be very interested to know Hindi. There's so many I would like to acquire. I'm like an aspiring polyglot, right? Like, I want to know Russian. I want to know Chinese. I want to know Japanese. I want to know Hindi. I want to know. There's so many languages I want to perfect for no other reason than to read the literature, and to be able. I feel like I'm missing out so much when I'm reading a translation. I know I'm missing out. I know that. I see how they translate French, into English, and I see where some meaning gets kind of, or things get kind of simplified or whatever. Yeah, I know whenever I'm reading a translation, there's a good deal of nuance that's not being communicated. So yeah, but I would love to know Hindi. That'd be great. You want to teach me? How many? But I mean, but it begs the question, right? So how many languages should one be working on at the same time, right? Is it insane to, if you only have, let's say you have an hour or 2 hours a day, which is still quite a lot, right? Let's say I carve out an hour or 2 hours a day just to focus on language, and if I'm working on 6 different languages, that's not going to be very little time with each of those. So maybe it's better just focus on one. Which one? It makes sense, since I'm living in Taiwan. It makes sense to focus on Chinese. It would be nice to deepen my understanding of the language. Reading the language is a whole other animal. Vietnamese is great because they're using Latin. They're using the Latin alphabet. The tones are in there. You can see them. So you know how the word is pronounced because it's phonetic. You know the tone of the word because they've marked that for each word. So learning to read Vietnamese is not a huge challenge. Learning to speak it and making these beautiful Vietnamese sounds that people are going to understand, that's a huge challenge. For an English speaker to speak really intelligible Vietnamese is difficult. It takes that takes time. But learning to read it does not take much time at all. So, but learning to read Chinese takes more time for sure. It would be nice to be able to pick up I think I have a Chinese book over here. So, this is a Chinese translation of a French book. The Happy Dead. Not The Walking Dead, The Happy Dead. But yeah, but I mean, I can't pick up a page of this. I mean, I sat in Chinese classes at it's Cheng Gong Dashi in Tainan. I did that for about 3 months. It was an intensive program. It's 4 hours a day. It was intense. I did it for about 3 months, and I got to a basic level, and I can read about 10% of what I see in Chinese, maybe. It says, "Wow, is the first time seeing a different language." Oh, you've never seen another? Here's a Chinese book. I got these from the public library. The library around here is really great. I mean, certainly most books are in Chinese. This is a Chinese translation of a French novel. And this is just a straight language learning book, teaching Vietnamese to English speakers. But the public library here is fantastic, and I get to, there's full sections of German and French and Japanese and Korean and everything. So I'm in a good place to learn languages. I have a really great resource right down the street where I can get all kinds of books, like children's books. There's media like movies and TV shows and things. I mean, we live in such a great time now. You just open YouTube and you can find content in any conceivable language. There's so many good resources, podcasts and all that stuff. But I mean, the problem is that most of them are not made for learners, right? So if I just open up my Apple podcast thing or whatever, and I, just open a random Chinese podcast, whatever the top 10 are, it's not made for learners. So it's at a level that is just, I only understand, I don't know, 5% of what's being said or something. So that's not enough to really, to be able to really, grow my language ability. I do think there's probably some benefit to hearing the kind of music of the language. So just like when I was learning French, I used to put on Radio Canada, which is like the French speaking radio station in Quebec, in the French speaking part of Canada. And I would just listen to it. And I didn't understand most of it, right? But I just let it play in the background. And my brain just kind of got familiar with I call it the music, right, of the language. So like the sounds, so that when it came time for me to produce those sounds, my brain already had this kind of catalog of French sounds, right? And if I made a sound that was different, it would kind of just like signal to my brain, oh, that's not a French sound. That doesn't belong in that, right? So I do think listening helps your pronunciation down the road, maybe not immediately. It's definitely not, unless someone's speaking to you again, they're connecting the word with the meaning is really clear. The word is connected to the thing or the action, right? Vietnamese, if I want to say I'm reading a book, right? And you can see me and know you don't speak Vietnamese at all, right? But if I say doi, right, you know that I'm referring to me. And then if I go dao, my tones might be off. I'm sorry, Vietnamese listeners, but you can correct me if you want. Dao is like reading, right? And then sak. So even if you don't know Vietnamese, and if you just heard those words connected to that image, right? Doi, dao, sak, right? You would be able to already kind of intuitively get the idea, right? And I could do that in 6 different languages, right? And even if you don't speak those languages, you would start then to be able to acquire it. Not the first time, certainly, but if I did that again, eventually those words would stick to you, and that they would become your lexicon or your vocabulary, right? That you're starting to grow. The nice thing about Vietnamese, the nice thing about Chinese too, is that the grammar is not as tricky as it is with French or Spanish. So you don't have to really worry too much. Once you acquire that word, you don't have to worry so much about changing the form of the word like you do in French or Spanish or English or German or whatever. Yeah, the body language. Yeah, you're quite right. The body language the facial expressions. You get a lot of information. I just recently I watched a Japanese movie. Now it was a Japanese movie, so they're speaking Japanese. The subtitles are in Chinese because I'm in Taiwan, so of course they're using the local language as the subtitle. And I don't speak Japanese, and my Chinese reading, like I said, is really really low level. But I understood what was happening in the movie, right? Because of their body language and their facial expressions and the way they made language, So you can get a lot of information just from watching, right? I think it's if you spent hours upon hours every day just watching TV or just watching movies, you would probably acquire quite a bit. And if you get a little bit of help, let's say in the a little bit of grammar help, if it's like a language where you really need to kind of get a couple grammar rules under your belt, just to figure out what's going on, or maybe some of the syntax, which is where the words go right in the sentence. You just get those kind of explained to you in a simple way. You would probably you would probably go a long way, right? Like really simple in your first language, someone just kind of giving you say the nuts and bolts, right, of how the language works. And then the bulk of your time is spent in just watching media, or if you're lucky enough, you can interact with people. I always tell people, like when I lived in Vietnam, it's a very social country. It's different than Taiwan. Taiwan's a little bit more introverted, I would say, right? It's if I go to a cafe, it's usually pretty quiet here. A lot of people are studying by themselves or sitting by themselves. In Vietnam, it's not usually like that. It's usually big groups of people, right? It's more chatty. It's just a more kind of social place, a little bit more extroverted. So it was much easier to get into those language situations with real people because it's just more natural to their culture. It was the same thing when I was in Quebec. Um, it's so different than if you go to a Spanish-speaking country, where often it's more extroverted. Maybe easier to meet people, easier to make friends. In a French-speaking country, maybe it takes longer to do that, right? Not for everybody, certainly, but I'm generalizing. But it does make a difference, right? If you get into those situations where now you are surrounded by the speakers of that language and you can just hear them interacting, you get so much information. You get so much, kind of meaning connected to the sounds of the language. And so I started to acquire Vietnamese much, much faster. In addition, I could read, right? So like I said, the words are in Latin script. So I could read, and I was surrounded by more people talking to me or around me in the language. So my acquisition of that language was happening much faster than it did here, where someone needs to teach you how to read Chinese, or it does not come intuitively. And then, it wasn't, I was not in the situation often where I was surrounded by Chinese speakers. So, so acquiring the language was happening slower. That's why I took the class. I was like, all right, well, I'll put myself in that situation. And I did it. But then I started working, right? I got a job and I started working full time. And then at that point, once I'm working full time, I don't have, then my time of being in that language starts to get diminished greatly. And now I'm spending all this time in my first language and explaining my first language to people and, planning lessons in my first language. So it's not an excuse, but it is part of the reason why I'm not. I wish I had, again, like if someone wants to pay for my life, pay for my rent, pay for my food, and then I can just go study for 4 hours or 6 hours or whatever a day. I would, my level would be super high. I think in Chinese certainly would take longer than French or Spanish for an English speaker, but uh, it wouldn't happen. So it would happen. It would start to happen pretty quickly, I think, if I was able to spend that much time. So yeah, I envy the guys on YouTube who are like, I learned Chinese in a year. It was like, well, you probably had someone paying for your life, while you were devoting all your time and effort on acquiring that language. So yeah, I would never judge anybody. Like as a teacher, you meet people of all different levels, and so you know whether they're adults or they're children or whatever. Whenever I hear someone who has a high level of English, I think either they're lucky enough, if they're young, it's probably because their parents paid extra money, for them to go to language classes or have a private tutor. Um, that's one way. The other way is like if they're just really somehow into like the content, whatever it is, if it's a TV show. Or I had one student in Vietnam. He was not like what you would call like a model student. He never came to class prepared. He never had his pencil, but his English was really great. And one day I asked him, like, why is your English so good? I was just curious, like, do your parents speak English? Does your brother speak English? And that wasn't the case, right? But he told me that every day after school, he would go home and he would have this online game, and he's got his headphones on and they're communicating. It's like one of those like army shooting games or whatever, but you're on a team, right? And you have to communicate to your team members, to kill the enemy or whatever. So, but the people he was playing with, they're all speaking English. So he's doing that for, I don't know, I mean, 3-4 hours, whatever, after school. He's in that game, getting all that content, and it's connected to the actions of that game and just the little side conversations that go on, And it really, really, really improved his English. I mean, to the point where he was the best or the most fluent in the class, even though he had the least interest in learning, right? He's not interested in learning English, but he was interested in that game. And that was like that was everything. That was the thing that gave him the advantage over all the other students, because he had this love, right? I mean, I think the motivation has to come partially from a place of love. Like, you love the culture, you love the content, you love the person, you love the community or whatever. I think that helps greatly. Is it necessary? No. I think you can still acquire a language the old-fashioned way, sitting in a class, and eventually you'll. But I think for adults, that motivation factor is really important. If you don't have it, if it's not financial or relational or something, if you don't have that, I think there's probably you won't get very far. But again, it's time, right? So I mean, if you just show up, like if your job is making you go to language classes or something for some reason. I knew a guy that worked for IKEA. IKEA sent him to a different country, and he had to go take language class. So his job was sending him to language classes so he could acquire, I think, German. That was his job. So he just sat in those classes, and he did acquire German, But I think it helped him that he had a German-speaking girlfriend too. And I'm sure he was socializing in German, You go out, you hang out in the language with people, you're for sure going to learn a lot more. Battle Royale game helps a lot. Yeah. Yeah, and you get to hear all the different accents too, right? That's something I don't know if you're familiar with the IELTS test, right, or the TOEIC test or whatever. But on those tests, the listening, you have British accents and American, Australian, Canadian. Some of the students have a hard time with telling the different accents, especially if they're speaking like a British accent, because they just don't. The media that they acquire is mostly North American accent. So for them, that's easy. My accent's no problem because they hear that all the time. in the Marvel movies and whatever else they're watching. But if you give them a British accent, they might feel confused. So yeah, getting exposure to those accents is going to be helpful. With English, you hear, because so many people speak English as a second language, so you get this whole world of people who are using English with some kind of accent. So I'm used to it. Where I grew up, you hear English spoken with all kinds of accents, and so for me, it's no big deal. But I mean, interesting. When I was in Vietnam and I was speaking Vietnamese, now I'm speaking with an accent, right? I'm not speaking native like Vietnamese. Even if I use the right words, local people are not used to hearing those kind of substitutions happen. And even if I was saying the right thing, right words, right tone, but maybe my accent's not perfect, they might not understand. So yeah, if it becomes a situation where more and more people start to learn Vietnamese, then maybe that won't be as much of an issue, because they'll start to hear it with the different accents. But yeah, it's an interesting business, acquiring languages. It's interesting. I mean, it's what I do for work. I mean, I teach people to help them acquire English or perfect their English, and it's actually really rewarding kind of job. I love watching that journey of people who come into the class at usually with English they've had some in school, so they're kind of like A2 level maybe, but then watching them go from A2 to B2, which is huge, because like I said, at B2 you can communicate. Is it perfect? No, but I understand them, they understand me. We can talk about all kinds of topics. It's fun to watch that happen, and if they're able to spend the time, if they do get to come to class, several times a week, and they really put the time in, maybe at home they're watching TV shows or reading or whatever. If they're actually putting the time in, that happens pretty quickly. It doesn't take that long, really, if there's time, if you have the time to do it. But but a lot of my students are working adults. They come to class once a week. It's an hour class. That's 4 hours a month. Over the year, that's not a lot. And I asked them, are you outside of class? Are you doing anything else? Are you, do you have English speaking friends? Are you watching, do you have a TV show that you love? And if the answer is no, I know that that's going to be an incredibly long journey for them to go from that A2 level, kind of struggling, to that B2 level where they're, pretty conversational in that language. That's a really long journey if you only have 1 hour a week, to do it, and you're doing nothing else outside of the class. So it's all about that time, I've changed my mind a little bit, because my method used to be like, okay, we'll just get, full immersion, and as long as the teacher's kind of trying to connect, the meaning as best as they can with images or expressions or whatever, if it's full immersion, the student will acquire the language. I think maybe that's true for kids, or more true for kids. Adults usually have questions. Adults want to know why. We always have that, but why? And we're always comparing it to the first language. And I do think it's, for adults, they benefit from a little bit of explanation in their first language, or having the ability to ask questions, grammar questions. I think it can be helpful. Although I don't think it's necessary to. You can take that too far. I've seen a lot of classes where the whole class is like explaining in the first language, right? So here, the teacher's speaking Chinese. If the class is 1 hour, it's 50 minutes, or 45 minutes maybe, of Chinese, and then only 10 or 15 minutes of English really spoken in the class. That, I think, is a waste of time. I think if you don't have to spend really long on explaining it, but I think a little explanation is helpful in the first language, and having that kind of, creating sentences. I mean, I don't know, but when I was learning French, I couldn't fill in all the words, right? I didn't know all the words. So I had my English, I had my French, but I couldn't. So sometimes I would say like a half sentence in French and then have to fill in the rest with English. And that's, I mean, if you're with people who's, understand both languages, that's great, So it's really beneficial to have a teacher that's bilingual, because then the student can do that. They can just speak half the sentence in the L2 in the language you're trying to learn, and half in English or whatever their L1 is. That can be really helpful. So I've kind of changed my mind on this immersion thing a little bit. I think it is useful, like for sure useful. So where to go now as as a teacher? Ideally, I would love to have two teachers in the classroom, so students can hear two individuals interacting, because that's how we learn our first language, really. Like, we're listening to our brothers and sisters and parents and uncles, and they're talking to each other in these kind of communicative situations where it's connected to meaning, so they get all that incomprehensible input. And then maybe having small kind of, I call it pop-up grammar, where you just kind of you talk about the grammar just enough, to help them kind of get the idea, and just kind of, you can move on, but not spending so much time in that grammar discussion that it takes away from the time in the second language, because really time in that second language is everything. If that class is just taken up with speaking the student's first language, you're kind of wasting their time, I think. The more time in the language, the better. So yeah, as a teacher, I would love that, but it's not like economically, like it's not practical. So you're gonna no school wants to pay two teachers for one class. I mean, that's like, and the teachers don't want to take a cut in pay, for that to happen. But I think that would be ideal. I think about how when I was learning, or I was trying to learn any language, when I was able to hang out with people who were speaking that language, I was able to grow my vocabulary much, much, much faster. I'm listening to them talk, and that's really powerful. Not everyone has that. If you're trying to learn Vietnamese and you live in Kansas City or a place where, I don't know, I'm just choosing some random city, but like a place without a big Vietnamese community, good luck, right? You're probably not going to have those situations. So having that in the classroom would be so great. But again, it's about the money. The teachers wouldn't want to take a cut, and certainly the school wouldn't want to pay two teachers for one class. So I heard there's some school in Thailand that does that. That's their whole methodology. They're kind of going on this idea of giving the students as much input as possible. They're actually telling the students not to produce language in the beginning. It's like the rule of that school is, like, if you're a beginner student, you're not supposed to be participating, not yet. Your job is really just to receive, to listen, and to kind of acquire the language that sort of natural, way, by listening to people. Hopefully I've never been to that school. It sounds interesting. I would love to go there, but they have two teachers in the classroom to do that, and they're using this kind of comprehensible input methodology. I think that sounds like a great way to learn. It would be wonderful, but economically, I don't know, is it for the school or for the teachers? I don't know. Maybe it's expensive school. But as a learner, that's what I want. I want to be in situations where I have the ability to be around people who are willing to talk to me, or at least talk around me. So the students who get to do those study abroad things, where they get to live with the host family, I've noticed that too. So when I went to Canada to learn French, I did not live with a host family. I lived in an apartment. I had a roommate who spoke English and French, and we just spoke English to each other, right? So at home, even though I was watching French TV and listening to French radio, I wasn't with a family. The students who were with the host family are with a bunch of people who don't speak English. The kids don't speak English, mom and dad don't speak English. They're around this family, interacting all the time. Their levels much faster, like much faster. They're getting all that input in real world, real life situations. Um, that's so valuable, you know. I mean, not everyone has the ability to do that. It's expensive, you know. Study abroad, you have to go to the place. Again, you have to have someone pay for your life, you know, like pay for the class, the tuition, your food, you know, all that stuff, you know. So when someone achieves a high level in a language, it's usually they're kind of just lucky, you know, that someone's been able to give them that ability, you know, the time to really focus on just that language. If they're, you know, working two jobs, and you know, I mean, there's ways to do it. You can kind of sneak it in, you know. I don't do apps really on my thing, but I mean, some of my friends use Duolingo and things. I think it can help, you know, but but I think it's going to be a slow process. Like you can listen to, you know, you can on your commute, you can listen to your, you know, whatever audio thing you're doing, or watch a YouTube video or whatever, if you're on the bus, or you know, on your break you do your apps or whatever. You go home, you watch a movie. I mean, that's great, right? You're getting input, but it's a slower journey. Imagine you were working with people who are speaking that language. Imagine you were living with people who spoke that language. It would just be so much faster, you know. My friends who ended up working, yeah, I mean, like working in a restaurant or something. Again, their language so fast, it's all day long. That's, you know, that's what they're doing. As far as like accent and things, I mean, that's a different. There's a lot of, you know, research on that. I think the general rule with accent is that the younger you acquire the language, you probably have less of an accent, right? But I think partially is that adults feel foolish when they make sounds that don't feel natural to them. Vietnamese is a great example because there are sounds in Vietnamese that are so different than English, and to produce them accurately, uh, I felt kind of like I was making weird sounds. Now, weird is relative, right? Because what's weird to me, as far as a language sound, is different than somebody. If you're Vietnamese, that's a perfectly normal sound, right? So, for me, it felt you feel self-conscious, right? So I think a lot of adults actually feel self-conscious when they try to mimic that accent perfectly, and therefore they never actually achieve that kind of native like accent. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. It just means they have to probably work on it harder. I was to say, okay, I tried Duolingo for English, yeah, but in the end, I just more verbs, and yeah. I used Duolingo briefly just to kind of see what it was about. I got bored, but for some people, I mean, again, like it's input, right? So any input's good. I mean, if you enjoy it, if you're getting something out of it, if you you know, you don't mind doing it, then it's gonna help. How could it not, right? But I found this sort of gamification of Duolingo to be sort of annoying. I'm not a gamer, you know, it's not my thing. And honestly, a lot of the sentences were kind of weird. I know what they were going for. They're just trying to get you to sort of understand how the language works. But isn't it more interesting to make it more practical from the beginning, you know, so that when you start, you're learning the high frequency verbs connected to, like, in a context, right, of a sentence with a bunch of other nouns and adjectives that are going to come up, you know, more often, and now you have a kind of practical base, and then that, I think, builds confidence, because once you can start to navigate those simple conversations, then you you're more likely to start talking to people, right? Or you're interacting with people who speak that language if they're around you, and then you're going to just grow and grow and grow. I think a lot of what stops people is this shyness, you know. When I get into a Chinese, so for instance here, you know, I walk outside, there's Chinese speakers everywhere, right? So I can get into those situations easily, uh, but I'm not that confident in my Chinese, and so I kind of avoid them a lot of the time, you know, because as an adult, it's embarrassing. Kids aren't embarrassed because kids are already functioning at this level of I don't know much about the world, you know. So like little kids don't really care. They don't really get so embarrassed about the language thing, but adults feel that, you know, that red face burning, you know, like embarrassment of I don't know if you've had that experience, but you know, like you're in a situation where, you know, you want you're an intelligent person, you know how to express it in your first language, but in your second language, it's like, you know, you can't even make a really simple interaction happen, and it's just dead embarrassing. So yeah, so yeah, I mean, I think like most adults, you just sort of shy away from it. It's the same here. I mean, you know, I speak English. I think it's probably pretty clear to most people when they're out in public. If they wanted to speak English to me, I would respond to them. But same thing, you know, they're at that A2 level. They know enough to kind of, you know, they know a couple words and some things, but they don't know really how to use it. And so if they got into a conversation with me, they would start to feel this automatic embarrassment. So they just usually shy away from it. So I don't usually get a lot of people just walking up to me and asking me to practice. I did find that was true though in Vietnam. A lot of people would do that. Even older people, yeah, younger people and older people who wanted to learn. They would just say, "Hey, can I practice?" But you know, but again, maybe they were at A2 level. I don't know. Some of them, or B1 level, but they had enough, you know, and they just wanted to get into those kind of language interactions to start to, you know, boost their level. A lot of their schools would make them do it. They don't do that here, but when I don't know about now, but when I was living in Vietnam, I would sit in the park and they would say, "Hey, you know, do you mind if I record you?" And they would record the conversation, and then they would use it in school. So it was the school was the one that was like that was their homework, you know. But I think it was really helpful. You know, I'm sure. I met one kid at the park. It was probably I don't know, he's like 16 or something. He dropped out of school, or he wasn't going to school anymore. But his English was so great that, and it was all because he was hanging out in this park and he was interacting because it's in the tourist area. He was interacting with foreign people all the time. So his English got really, really good, even though he was not an academic, you know. I kind of really feel like we do a disservice by making language this academic pursuit, um, because it's not. I mean, of course, you can make anything an academic pursuit, you know, but it shouldn't be our first exposure to it. Our first exposure to language should not be for academic purposes. It should not be for a grade at all. I think that is the thing that puts in people's head this idea that I can't do that, or I'm not good at English, or I'm not good at whatever language. I'm not good at languages, right? You hear that from people all the time. Like you know, I'm not good at drawing, I'm not good at playing piano, and I'm not good at languages. Our brains are like are have evolved for communication. So I think it's our nature, right? So humans, that's what we do, right? So we communicate, we use language. Gorillas don't really, you know, maybe dolphins do somehow, but not quite the same way, right? So like, so when when people say they're not good at it, I always say like, well, your brain is actually good at it. You just have been in a situation that made you feel stressed and made language into this academic thing where someone's going to grade you and have a big red marker and, you know, do all that stuff. I think that creates a sort of can't mentality. And if people were I think if they're lucky enough for their language learning to be a kind of casual and fun and zero pressure situation in the beginning, I think they would have much more success. And then also have that, oh, I can, I can do it attitude instead of I can't, I hate giving grades, I mean, I work in language centers where luckily I don't have to grade, or very, very, very little, because it's the last thing I would want is for a student to feel like they're failing in a bad way. You make mistakes, and that's okay, right? I mean, the little kids make mistakes constantly in their speaking, but no one's really correcting them. Maybe they're modeled, like their parent or whoever, like models the correct, grammar or the correct vocabulary or something. But they're not doing it in a way that makes them feel bad or makes them feel stupid or makes them feel less, for not knowing how to communicate. That should never be the case. That's my feeling. It's like, as a teacher, I don't want to do that. I would never want my students to feel like they can't, because everyone can. I mean, anyone can. Again, it's like, if you put the time into it, you can learn Arabic or Russian or whatever. I don't think it really matters. Apparently, is it Hungarian? I think is the hardest European language for English speakers anyway. But even like a language like that, I mean, it might take longer than learning Spanish or French or something, but with enough time in the language, with enough input, with enough communication, kind of interactions, people being patient with you, and it would happen, right? If you were in it. Well, that's I've been yapping for an hour, and I think that's all I'm going to do today. I mostly got on because I haven't been on YouTube in a while, and I kind of wanted to get back into it. I'm going to make more content, and I don't know what exactly it's going to look like. Maybe I'll just talk about my own journey. Maybe I'll talk about me trying to acquire Chinese or Vietnamese or something. Maybe I'll do some more English related content for people who want to learn English, who are at that A2 level, kind of want to get into the intermediate levels. I might do that. I'm deciding, but I mean, I'm at a point where I have a little bit of time. I can start making more content. So I mostly got on to kind of just get my feet wet again in the YouTube, in the ocean of YouTube. So much content out there. Anyway, well, hey, thanks for hanging with me, people who are watching, or if anyone's watching this on the rerun. Thanks for hanging in there. If you've watched me for an hour, cheers. It's wonderful. Let me know. I mean, you can write in the comments what kind of content you would be interested in seeing. But I'm gonna go. I got stuff I want to do today. It's a beautiful day here, so I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna end my stream. Thanks for hanging out. I'll see you soon, hopefully, and have fun wherever you are. Bye-bye.